Bleach 1000-Year Blood War episode 32, titled The Holy Newborn, adapts a considerable amount of manga material, and it does so very faithfully, and it even covers some content from chapter 617 which wasn't adapted into earlier episodes. For the most part, this week's episode focuses on adapting content from chapters 625 to page 2 of chapter 629. Now, like I've said, a lot of stuff is faithfully adapted from the manga, but we do get some minor anime exclusive additions like Lil Toto, Giselle and Baz B reacting to the formation of Yhwach, Shunsui having new lines of dialogue before the Shinigami enter the gate to the royal palace, along with some dialogue between Yoruichi, Ganju and Chad, which is rearranged from chapter 626. This episode features a lot of downtime, with Ichigo and his group returning to the royal palace thanks to the powers of Riruka and Yuki, while the Gote 13 make their own way to the royal palace thanks to a gate that is being created with the combined efforts of Urahara and Mayuri. Meanwhile, Yhwach, who has just finished completely absorbing the Soul King, begins to reimagine the royal palace into his new fortress called Yhwach. There's a lot of stuff that I've been waiting to see adapted into this episode, including Ichigo mentioning that he has previously visited the Valley of Screams, which confirms that Bleach Movie 1 is canon. So before I give away everything in the introduction of this video, let's begin my manga versus anime comparison of episode 32 of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. As always, I'm going to be refraining from talking about scenes which are one-to-one adaptations from the manga, and I'll solely be focusing on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. We got really tired of the same old boring anime shirts, so we decided to launch Getsuga.com with the aim of creating designs inspired by our favorite anime and manga. We came up with designs that look cool and represent all of our favorite stories. Check out the latest Instinct collection, which features some amazing designs like this Frosted Heavens design inspired by Toshiro Hitsugaya, or this Instinct design inspired by Hollow Ichigo, and my personal favorite, which is the Heart design, which was inspired by Ukiura Shifa. Do not miss out, go to Getsuga.com and wear your favorite stories. So the episode does begin with a brief anime exclusive scene where Urahara explains to the gathered Shinigami and Quincy that they need to raise their hands while holding the orbs in order to channel their spiritual pressure into the orbs. So we get some great panning shots of all of the Shinigami along with the Quincy as the gate begins to form, but then material from chapter 627 begins to be adapted into the anime. This is where the Quincy cityscape is being ripped off of the Serite and it is floating up into the sky. Now while this is happening, the anime includes some original scenes of the gate that they were creating beginning to dissipate. This is in addition to some anime exclusive scenes of Mayuri in the lab with sirens blaring, as the anime uses this new premise which has been set up of Mayuri in the lab to include some content from chapter 617 which wasn't adapted into earlier episodes. In the manga, by this point in the story, the gate was fully formed, but in the anime we are now getting those scenes where the gate isn't properly forming, but we'll come back to how the anime executes upon this later in the video as we now cut to the opening song. Following this, material from chapter 625 is faithfully adapted into the anime. This includes all of the sections of the chapter where Yoruichi explains to Ichigo what they have been planning behind the scenes. All of this is done very faithfully, as the diagrams from the manga are shown to us in the anime via Yukio creating a screen within his room, while Yoruichi explains to Ichigo how they had utilized the Valley of Screams with the powers of Yukio and Riruka in order to create a method of transportation to the royal palace. Now, the only real content that wasn't adapted into this episode is stuff that I've mentioned in last week's manga versus anime comparison video, and this is page 16 of chapter 625, and this is where the Schutzstaffel are sitting on sofas while they are waiting for Yhwach to absorb the Soul King. Now these pages from the end of chapter 625 are not adapted because at this point in the story, Yhwach has completely absorbed the Soul King. Now following this, we get an anime exclusive scene for a couple of seconds which shows us the gate that the Shinigami have just created beginning to disappear. Now this perfectly leads us into material from pages 14 to 16 of chapter 617. This is when Nanao comments upon Ukitake having a lot of spiritual pressure which allows him to maintain his debilitated body, and if only he was helping then the gate wouldn't have disappeared like it is now. Lisa of course reassures Nanao as Hiyori and the other Vizards appear wearing their Shinigami Shihakusho. Now the only real difference between chapter 617 and this episode is that in the manga, this is where Mayuri had first appeared in front of Urahara, but in the anime, because they've restructured stuff, he's already on the scene and he's in the lab. So none of this introductory dialogue between him and Urahara is adapted into the anime. Instead, we cut to him saying that if they needed a vast amount of spiritual pressure, then why don't they just use his spiritual pressure amplifier? And just like in the manga, Urahara says that he should have told him that he had something like that sooner, as Mayuri apologizes as he didn't anticipate that there would be a situation where they would need it. So yeah, thanks to using the spiritual pressure amplification device, the gate is now perfectly formed, and the anime has now thankfully adapted this content from chapter 617, which we were all fearing was not going to be adapted, since it did involve some important information in relation to Ukitake's character. So I'm glad that we finally have this now in episode 32. Now following this, we get several panning shots of the Shinigami and the Quincy channeling their spiritual pressure into the orbs, and we get some new dialogue from Shunsui here as he states that Ukitake's efforts will not be in vain. We cut to this shot of Ukitake as Mimihagi is still releasing from his body. It seems like he hasn't died yet, which is very strange. This leads me to believe that Ukitake's role in the anime has not ended just yet. We then cut to material from chapter 626, and this features some downtime with everybody sat within Yukio's room as they travel to the royal palace. Now everything seems to be pretty faithfully adapted from the manga, aside from some new dialogue that Yoruichi has, as she explains to Ichigo that he needs to seize the opportunity by taking down the Quincy with one of its strongest Getsuga Tensho. She also adds that she will back him up if any enemy tries to pursue him, with Ganju also having some new lines of dialogue here stating that he will take care of any of the fodder enemies, and Chad's dialogue in chapter 626 is altered in the anime because in the manga he had asked about the abilities of Pernaida, speaking to Yoruichi stating that he couldn't tell what he had done to her. Yoruichi comments stating that she doesn't know herself, all she knows is that her arm was twisted before she had known it. She advises to stay away from Pernaida, commenting that she'll just deal with him from a distance. Now these two manga panels are not included in the anime, as instead we have Chad saying that they don't really know the abilities of the Schutzstaffel, as well as commenting on Yhwach's ability to Almighty, which allows him to see into the future. Now this perfectly syncs back up with the manga, as it leads to Orihime questioning if only Ichibe was around they could ask him about the abilities of the Quincy, as then Riruka intervenes and tells them to stop being so gloomy. Now material up until page 5 of chapter 626 is faithfully adapted into the anime, but then pages 6 to 9 from chapter 626 are not adapted, and this again is mostly content of the Schutzstaffel sitting around as Hashward informs them that the Soul King is completely gone now, as instead of this the anime has a brief anime exclusive scene when we cut to the Schutzstaffel as he is thinking back to Ichigo killing the Soul King, and then him delivering the final blow to Ichigo which had made him fall from the royal palace. So in the manga, the Schutzstaffel actually walk away from Yhwach and they return when Hashward tells them that he has completely absorbed the Soul King. Now while returning, Askin has some comments that he thinks to himself that are not adapted into the anime, as he comments on all of that black liquid leaking from Yhwach, which is covering the entire room. Now in the manga, Yhwach says, "Is that you, Hashward?" commenting on him and the Schutzstaffel returning, but instead of that Yhwach says, "My children," as he addresses everyone, as the Schutzstaffel did not leave him while he was absorbing the Soul King in the anime. So following this, the rest of chapter 626 is faithfully adapted, all the way up until the point where Yhwach states that they are going to recreate their Quincy nation, and then we get about 20 seconds of an anime exclusive scene which shows us the formation of Vaharvelt, as the ruins that have risen from the Serete create this new battleground, joining the 5 separate realms of the Zero Division into a 5-pointed Quincy cross. Now as the royal palace is being transformed, we cut to the mid-card of the episode. Now the first mid-card is about the gate that the Gote 13 are creating to enter the royal palace, while the second mid-card is about the Valley of Screams or the Kyogoku. Now following this, pages 1 to 16 of chapter 627 are faithfully adapted into the anime, anime. So this is up until the point that Urahara says that the gate has completely formed, while we cut to Ichigo and his group as Yoruichi states that they have finally arrived. Now as Ichigo opens the gate to enter into the royal palace, we cut back to the Gotei 13 and Shunsui has new lines of dialogue here as he thanks all of the Shinigami and the Quincy for their efforts, explaining to them that they are about to leave now. Now when both of the groups arrive, the anime begins to change around some of the sequence of events, because at the end of chapter 627 we just have the scenes involving Ichigo and his group as Yoruichi comments on how Yhwach has rebuilt the royal palace into his own. And then the beginning of chapter 628 features the Shinigami reacting to the transformed royal palace. The anime changes this around by having us cut back and forth between Ichigo's group and the Gotei 13. Now some dialogue that Shinji had stated in page 2 of chapter 628 is given to Hiyori instead. This dialogue is where Hiyori states that they thought that they were coming to the royal palace, so why are they in a Quincy town now? So yeah, Shinji says this dialogue in the manga, but in the anime it's given to Hiyori. So yeah, material from the early parts of chapter 628 is combined with the end of chapter 627, just to add a lot more impact to the arrival of Ichigo's group and the Gotei 13 to the transformed royal palace. Now following this, the rest of the material from chapter 628 is faithfully adapted into the anime, aside from a couple of panels where Ichigo, Ganju, Chad and Orihime are trying to imagine how Yoruichi's younger brother would look like. The first image they imagine a muscular man with a ponytail, but after Yoruichi says that he looks a lot like her, they then imagine a cat wearing a Shinigami Shihakusho with a sword. So yeah, none of these two comedic manga panels make it into the anime. We then have content adapted up until page 12 of chapter 628, but then when Yhwach's castle begins to be created, we get some anime exclusive scenes of Lil Toto, Giselle and Bazbi reacting to the formation of the castle. These are only very brief inclusions, but they add a lot more impact as it shows us everybody who is there on the battlefield, and it's nice that the anime is doing this. I particularly like the change earlier where Shinji's dialogue was given to Hiyori, as it gives a lot more importance to characters who we didn't see much of within the manga, but we knew who were present on the battlefield. We know that the surviving Sternritters are going to be playing major roles in the future episodes, so it is nice that we've got these anime exclusive scenes involving them here, even if they only do last for a couple of seconds. The anime then adapts the rest of chapter 628, as then material from the first 2 pages of chapter 629 are also adapted, as the episode ends with Hashwald stating that they will do everything in their power to defeat the Shinigami in order to bring about the future which is reflected in Yhwach's eyes, and they will achieve all of this at the foundation of the new world here at Varavelt. We then of course cut to the credits, and there is no post-credit scene in this week's episode. So yeah, content from chapter 625 to the first 2 pages of chapter 629 are very faithfully adapted into this episode. And the only notable omissions were those 2 comedic gag panels involving Yushiro, as well as those panels of the Schutzstaffel having some downtime from chapters 625 to 626. Another notable change or addition that was made here was including content that wasn't adapted from chapter 617, and I'm glad that they were able to include it with how everything has been reworked and restructured. I do have to say that I'm impressed with how seamlessly everything is flowing, despite the amount of changes that have been made to the anime. While there are some notable differences between both versions, it feels like the anime version of the 1000-Year Blood War arc is definitely the more definitive one. Content is being restructured so that it flows better, and at the same time we're getting so many new additions which flesh out the story as well as the characters. Episode 32, The Holy Newborn, was a very straightforward episode, as it for the most part faithfully adapted all of the manga material that it covered. The end of this week's episode featured a poem from the beginning of volume 73 of Bleach, which had Renji on the cover. This hints at some anime exclusive scenes that we may be getting with Renji in episode 33, which is titled Gate of the Sun. Now this episode is named after chapter 629, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what new stuff will be included in next week's episode of Bleach. But we have now reached the point of the video where I do want to hand over the discussion to all of you. Let me know all of your favorite moments from this week's episode. Did you enjoy seeing Grimmjow and Neliel return to the story? What are your thoughts about the Valley of Screams being made canon in the Bleach anime? Did you enjoy seeing the return of the Fullbringer characters Riruka and Yukio? And what are your feelings about those brief anime exclusive scenes showing us the formation of Varavelt belt, as well as the Sternritter reacting to the formation of the castle. This was another episode which featured quite a lot of downtime, but I promise you from next week there's going to be a lot more fight sequences now that all of the participants have arrived onto the battlefield and the stage has been properly set. Once again, thank you for making it to the end of the video, and I cannot wait to see you next week for my breakdown and analysis of episode 33 of the all-new Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc anime.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.